Welcome to this week's show, and I am so honored to have this guest this week. I met her last spring at the conference in Boston for the Course of Miracles. Many of you know that I've been a student of the Course since the late 80s, early 90s when I first got into recovery. And it was such a powerful tool to keep me on my path. But now I look at the Course as a way of living. It's a beautiful guide on how to stay in love and disconnect from fear and honor ourselves, but be in oneness with all of those around us that we love. And it's just such a beautiful practice. And I'm honored today to have one of the most recognized teachers from the conference, Dana Marrocco, Dr. Dana Marrocco. And I have her beautiful book here, The Top 10 Lies We Tell Ourselves. Dana is the author of this magnificent book, and the top 10 lies we tell ourselves and how to stop living them is really the key that we're going to be talking about today. The teachings in this book draw from her professional background in educational psychology and the Course in Miracles, in a lighthearted but profound discussion of the most common self-deceptions that keep people from living happy and creative lives. Dr. Dana speaks, she sings, and she performs self-help stand-up at spiritual centers and retreats. And you can find her on YouTube. She has a wonderful channel where there's a series of videos, Did You Forget to Laugh? And you can connect with her at her website, drdanamarrocco.com. Dana, how are you, girls? Nice to see you again.
Oh, I'm great, and thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. As I mentioned, I've been a long-time student, and I can't say that I'm 100% consistent with my practice. I read every day the lessons, and then I might pull back for a while, and then I go back. It seems like the Course is always there when I need it.
Right, exactly. That you can count on.
And so I love a lot of spiritual teachers, but I keep going back and doing the lessons, and then going to the conference and connecting with all the teachers there was such a treat. Your book has 10 very powerful lessons in it that I just loved, but I had 3 that were my favorites.
Great.
And the first one that I wanted to, well, actually, I want to ask you something. I got ahead of myself. I want to know what attracted you to the Course of Miracles and why you've studied the Course and now why you write about it so beautifully.
Right. Great question. And I'm going to go deep with it. And I'm going to go back to childhood, just sharing that I was an only child. I was a bit of an isolated child growing up in rural Minnesota. And I just became an observer of all around me because I didn't have a lot. And I connected with nature. I connected with animals. And I was a very inquisitive child, just kind of very willing to look within and just trying to make sense of what was going on. But I did notice in myself at a very early age that I felt that something was wrong with me. I felt like other people were happier than me. I felt, later I would articulate it as feeling dead inside from an early age. And I just wondered why I felt that way. Do other people feel that way? Is anyone as happy as they seem to be? Are we faking it? These are kind of the questions I had. But I was very determined to study all of this like a scientist. And that carried through my life for a very long time, going through my psychology courses where, in the Western way that psychology is structured, we're encouraged to think like scientists and do experiments. And I loved all of that. And I took it as far as I could. I went to college for 10 years straight, full time, because I just didn't want to leave that role as a learner. And I learned a lot about myself and the world and how it worked. And but the thing is that it wasn't really tapping into making me feel better personally. I was still struggling with depression. I tried therapy, that helped some, certainly, but I just thought I must be missing something. And I was always kind of holding anything spiritual out at arm's length, thinking, well, that's not for me. I don't understand it. It sounds, strange. This whole idea of God and a higher power, like that can't be where to go. I'm a scientist. But when I had kind of what I consider now my spiritual midlife crisis at 40 after having 2 kids and suffering from postpartum depression, I really just cried out for help, honestly and truthfully, and said, well, if there is a higher power, then help me, but you probably won't because I don't really think you exist, but I'll try anything. So if there is a way to navigate through this with more peace and ease, I'm ready. And then slowly that did kind of shift things for me in just almost like a magical way. It wasn't overnight, but things just appeared towards me that I attracted that would help me on that path, and started with yoga, teaching yoga, and then getting into energy healing. And then at an energy healing conference with some colleagues, I just had the pleasure of sitting next to someone that said, have you heard of A Course in Miracles? And I said, yeah, I think I have that book, but I don't plan on reading it. I opened it and the language kind of turned me off. It sounded very Christian. And I was raised Catholic, been there, done that kind of thing. So I just kind of kept it out at arm's length. But when he gave me a 30-second description of what it really meant, I was blown away by the metaphysical piece of it. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go home and I'm going to start reading it. And that made a total transformation, I have to say.
You mentioned something that I hear all the time about the Course, the language. A lot of people have trouble with the language because it's not the way we speak. It's not the way other books are written. It is its own unique language because it is transcribed, a dialogue with Jesus. And people just don't know how to handle that.
Exactly. Yes.
So you also mentioned that you embraced it at a moment where you really felt you were in a dark place. And I did the exact same thing. I was at a point with my alcoholism that I knew I didn't have another day left in me, not one more day to continue to do what I was doing.
Right.
I was ready to die. And that's when I had a spiritual awakening, that there was another path, that there were lessons I needed to learn. And this was a voice in my head that I can never, I don't know where it came from. I can't explain it. Was it God? I don't know. Was it my higher power? It was definitely something. And it just said, you have lessons to learn. And once you master those lessons, you will need to go and teach others. And that piqued my curiosity enough not to do myself in that night, which I had planned right down to the finest detail, but to get up the next day and say, I've got lessons to learn. I got to get sober. I got to figure this out. And it was, my life changed so quickly. As you said, it was like a miracle. I went from being dependent on alcohol daily to stop drinking just like that and never struggled with alcohol again.
It's amazing.
That's not how it goes usually. That's not the normal story. We all know that. So I do feel blessed.
Right.
I was meant to uncover something, and
right.
I have such appreciation that I was given that opportunity to learn these lessons.
Right. And it's not that the power is within the practice or the book itself, of course not, but just helping you realize that your power isn't anything you can ever lose unless you choose to, store it away for other reasons that don't serve you, but just that we always have that limitless ability to heal ourselves. And then of course that healing ourselves, we understand that healing others is a part of that. There's only one of us appearing as many.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So I have 3 favorite lessons in your.
Good.
Yeah. And my first one was number 10. Nothing is more important than being right. And of course, you always are. We all struggle with this. We want to be right when we get into dialogue with people or confrontation. So give us a little Course perspective.
Yes. Well, first, I just wanted to say that I was very motivated in sharing my teaching that it be funny, because I do think that we take ourselves way too seriously, and we take our spirituality way, way, way too seriously, to the point where it can get real heavy. And for me, that just didn't work. The heavy kind of, sit on your knees and pray and close your eyes, just, the literally the gravity of it just wasn't helping me. What helped me was humor, just literally laughing my way through these faulty beliefs. And that's kind of the practice that I was following in studying the course and applying it in my life. And that's kind of what I had in mind when I wrote the top 10 list. I really modeled it after, watching David Letterman, how he structures a top 10 list. I thought, wouldn't it be funny if the ego was up there on stage and had to like really tell us what it was up to, and we could just, laugh at it together. Because I think that's the right way to use humor, where it's never about singling anyone out to make yourself, look or feel better temporarily. But if we could all laugh together at, the way that we, misperceive everything sometimes, that there's so much benefit in that, because then no one is singled out, and there's really a camaraderie, cooperative healing where it's, we're all in it together. We all heal or none of us heal kind of thing. But anyway, the number 10 that you picked, nothing's more important than being right. Yeah, I mean, certainly just flip on the news. I mean, you can see that in the political arena, you can see it in your own life. And there's a line in the course that says, would you rather be right or happy? Kind of like hold each one in your hand, left hand or right hand, like which one are you going to choose, right or happy? And some people might say, well, I'm happy when I'm right. And again, it might seem that way, but on a deeper level, are you really? If you're happy at someone else's expense, is that ever really fulfilling at all? I don't think so. And that's not the place I want to come from when I interact with others and get through life.
Also, I think the key thing about being right is the ego, and the course goes into a dialogue about ego that is, of course, I mean, just
right.
Fabulous. How that ego can just whip us around, and it's not who we are, and that's what creates that gnawing feeling that we have to be right or have to attack and
right.
condemn and do all those things. It's the ego, and the ego is a fear. When we're in ego, we're really disconnected from love.
Exactly. And the point of all these lies is really to bring ourselves to just a very compassionate, gentle way of looking at others. So we dissolve any judgments. Like, for example, when I wrote that lie, nothing's more important than being right, I think most people would react by saying, oh, I know someone like that. I'm not like that, but I know someone like that who always digs their heels in and has to be right. And so I use what I know from psychology, and in that chapter I reference Anna Freud and how she talked about reaction formation, and what it really means in this case is, the person who digs their heels in the hardest, the strongest, of course I'm right, and just shouting, just, spitting, you can imagine just the forcefulness of it. That person is actually the most afraid that they're wrong. That's just the way it works. And they're trying to cover that up by being forceful about being right. So when you understand that, it can really bring you to compassion quite quickly for people that can seem so obnoxious and can seem like they're attacking you. You can still find that compassion center in yourself.
The more you have to defend,
yeah,
the more fear there is inside.
Yes. Well said.
And to recognize that in somebody, as you said, when they're attacking, carrying on, and they're right in your face, know that there's something so big missing in them that they are terrified.
Exactly.
Yeah. Gives you a whole different perspective.
It's hard to always have compassion for anger, but fear, we can usually get there. If we think of someone as being afraid, we can think, oh, I could comfort them. And it can even just be in your mind, sending them a comforting thought in your mind, because they might not be able to accept anything else at that moment.
Don't you think that fear is kind of the motivator of really all bad behavior?
Absolutely. Yes.
Fear is underneath everything that's obnoxious and combative.
Right.
Yeah. So my next favorite one was lie number 4. The person who can hold a grudge the longest wins.
Right? I know. Doesn't it seem like we just, we almost sometimes define ourselves by our grievances? We have, you know, some really big ones that can last a lifetime, and maybe even beyond if we're if we're trying that hard to hang on to it. But I think there's a danger in defining yourself by a grievance against someone else, even if it's something pretty horrific. There's a difference between just experiencing it and seeing it as an experience that I appear to be having versus this is now who I am. I am a victim of blah, blah, blah.
I wrote a book this year based on that premise, that, and it's called Broken Open, Embracing Heartache and Betrayal as Gateways to Unconditional Love. And the reason why I wrote the book, I met so many women on my own path of healing that were stuck in such anger and resentment about what had been done to them. It had compromised their health. They had stopped living. They were so disconnected from the feeling of love. They said they would never love again. I said, this is more tragic than what happened.
Exactly. Yes.
And it was holding on to that grievance. They were victims of their pain. And I said, oh my God, I don't want to be that. I don't want to end up like that. There's got to be a better way. And of course, forgiveness is freedom. It's, you know, what gets you out of that judgment and that condemnation is to say, wait a minute, you know, none of us are perfect. We all have flaws. And forgiving ourselves.
Exactly.
And we can do a great job of holding a grudge against ourselves. Especially, you know, women, they hold so much anger against themselves for what happens to them. And instead of realizing our choices always bring us to certain points in life. We made choices 10 years ago that bring you to a situation today. We have to take responsibility for that. And when we do, it frees us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. The Course talks about how, you know, your grievances reveal what is not there. So it's almost like taking the opposite approach, like using it to identify your illusions where you've really been making an illusion or a story so real that you can't get past it, won't get past it. And like you said, the victimhood role emerges there. And what I love about the Course is that it's so deep. Like I didn't think I'd ever have a real explanation for why the victim role was so tempting, but it's all in the Course that you can close the book and say, no, that can't be right. But it really does make you see, like you said about responsibility, that this is a choice I'm making to see myself in this way. Like, is it even possible to be a victim ultimately? Is it possible? I don't know that it is.
Beautiful point. If we take responsibility, I don't think we can be victims. Right. I think by taking responsibility, we empower ourselves. We shift the whole energy of what we're experiencing. When we own our story, we take responsibility for the choices that we make. We take responsibility for what we say, what we do. I think it empowers us. It doesn't. It completely changes the scale.
Right.
And then we have another one that I just love. Reacting out of fear comes naturally. So stick with the program. And this is like the icing on the cake, reacting out of fear.
Yes. Well, I love how the Course is very clear that, you know, we have two teachers or two voices we can listen to, and the fear voice, the ego voice, always speaks up first and loudest, and it's obnoxious, and it's you know, condemning, and there's often an urgent piece about it that you should urgently be doing something other than what you're doing. What you're doing is wrong, but it's just incessant, like a woodpecker attacking a tree. And some people think that's their real, that's a real voice that can be trusted, and that's the only voice. But the Course is very clear with the mind training that just, again, don't identify with that voice, just relax and just be willing to accept another voice that comes right after that's much calmer and gentler and intuitive and leading you to all things good because you are all things good. Yeah, I mean, talk about a game changer.
I listened to that voice of the ego for 25 years, and that's what fueled my alcoholism.
Mm.
That condemnation that was in my head every day telling me I wasn't good enough. I was worthless. Um, and that night where I had that awakening, the voice that I heard was so calming and so soothing and said, "You can't go now. No, you can't leave. You've got things to learn."
Right.
And I knew, I said, there's something else going on here. It was just enough of a hook to get me out of that self-loathing and say, maybe there's something I really need to know here.
Exactly.
It's my life. Yeah.
Yes, taking on that role of, the Course talks about being, are you willing to be a happy learner? Because again, with the ego, you've unconsciously agreed to be a tortured learner. Like every lesson's just so hard and so unbearable, and there's going to be more hard and unbearable things, and that's the hamster wheel of the ego. But yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. We can, even through difficult times, be a happy learner. It comes down to thinking that you deserve it. You deserve it. This is your inheritance, your right to feel joy and peace through anything.
What do you think has been the greatest impact for you personally, being a student of the Course of Miracles?
I think the greatest quality for me to have is just kind of to not give up. It just takes diligence, and the Course talks about being vigilant only for peace, and that is what it is. Just that moment to moment decision. No, I did it again, and not beat yourself up for falling for that ego's hook. I think you used the word hook. And just the diligence to say, no, I can do this. I'm going to just keep practicing. And it does get easier. It's just like, playing piano or anything else, a developed skill where you can really reset that default, because I think we all have that default of ego and only ego, but you can reset it.
You can't play the piano well if you don't take lessons.
Exactly. Yes.
And the Course is all about the lessons.
Yes.
You can get daily. You don't even have to have the book. You can get them online. You can get them as an audio. Originally, back in the 80s and early 90s, I mean, there were very few texts. Now there are variations of the text.
Yes.
With, notes from the, her mind.
Scribe. Helen Chapman.
Helen, notes from her. And there's also books out there that simplify the language of the Course. So if somebody can't seem to get through the text, there are other, alternative books they can read that simplify the language. But it's such a powerful, powerful foundation for living a happy life.
It really is. It's really just more of a philosophy, it's.
Yes.
Not really, and that's not meant to be a religion. It's just a way of perceiving, a way of seeing.
And thank you for saying it's not a religion, because a lot of people, when they first read it, go, "Oh God, I had enough of this." It's funny, I said, "God, I've had enough of this since I was a kid." But it's not religion at all. No. Dana, can you give the listeners a little laser focused tip on how to get started with the Course and also how to reach you?
Sure. I think the best way to get started in the Course is to read it. It sounds basic, but it is meant to be self-study. And I know there's a lot of small groups meeting in people's homes and churches, and that's wonderful. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of teachers of the Course. What I did, and not that this is right for everyone, I just wanted to read it first for myself, just to have that intimate connection with it first. That worked for me, but certainly any way that you can, any way that your resistance will allow, whatever you can accept without fear, go for it, because it's just, and I'll give advice for when you read it. This happened to me, that just the text can be very dense and in the language. And I remember I used to have to literally hold my face and I could only get through like a page at a time, because literally, like, I was so resistant, and my ego was like, but look at this, like a squirrel, that distracted. But again, that vigilance I mentioned earlier, I was just committed. No, I think this is something of value to me. I feel guided to this book. I could feel it tingle in my hands the first time I held it. I'm like, I'm going to read this thing. Like, I'm a student, I can do it.
And you said
my advice is to read it, even if you don't feel like you're understanding it. I think that's key. Just kind of let it wash over you, like, like an ocean wave. Like, you don't have to make sense of each little tidbit as it comes in. Just notice how you feel when you read it. I feel good when I read it, even if don't feel like I have my full attention on it, or if I don't know exactly what they mean by a sentence. I feel different when I read it in every good way possible.
And you mentioned something very important. Resistance is going to come up when you read it. So
oh God, yeah.
Yeah, it stirs a lot of resistance. It's like, oh, do I really want to do this? Yes, the resistance comes up, but be prepared. Know that it's there to just kind of pull you off course.
Right.
Yeah. Dana, thank you so much. Here's your wonderful book, Top 10 Lies We Tell Ourselves. Thank you for being a guest this week.
Oh, thank you so much. This was fun.
Connecting with you.
Blessings to you and your listeners.
Thank you. Bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.